This is the last part of my recordings for week one, class one, which is the week of August 17th, 2000. And I want to give a proper introduction to what you're about to see, the film by Ken Burns called The Civil War. One of the commentators on the video who has a major part is a man who's gone now, named Shelby Foote. And this is the first volume of his narrative history of the Civil War. It took him 20 years to write. So I have that, I'm reading it now. Here is volume 2 of Shelby's massive tome. And here is volume 3. Each of these books is like 1,000 pages long, but believe me, they are a pleasure to read. So I also want to show you some stuff that we're going to post a couple of these photographs. I have a personal connection to the Civil War, and I'll explain it to you now. My great-great-grandfather, in other words, my grandfather's grandfather, was a man who was a German immigrant who came over here, I believe, in the 1840s. And he was from Bavaria. I know that by looking at this document, which is his Civil War discharge paper. And it shows me a few things. First of all, it tells me how tall he was. He was short, like me. He was a tailor by profession. He happened to live 80 years and passed away in 1920, which is only 38 years before my birth. And what's important to me is that he volunteered for the Union Army right away. He went in April of 1861 after the South attacked Fort Sumter. So we're taking a photograph of this, and my teaching assistant, Shay Hopkins, is going to post this on the class blackboard along with a photo of family mementos, and these are Henry's Civil War Veterans Medals for the Union Army. These were found, and I remember being there when they were found, when I was 7 years old in 1965, when my grandfather was the administrator or executor of his Aunt Gussie's estate. And Aunt Gussie was one of Henry Bryan's children. So think about this. She dies in 1965. She was in her 80s, and I was 7 years old. In other words, I personally knew someone whose father fought in the Civil War. And that is just what is called a tincture of time between the war in 1861, Henry's death at an advanced age for him in 1920, her death at an advanced age in 1965, and my connection to all this. And by the way, I'm very proud of his service. I also want to show you, these are his tailor's glasses that we found. And we're not going to take a picture of this, but this is very significant to me. This is his pipe that he had carved from a tree root at Lookout Mountain, where he got out of the service after his 3-year enlistment. And the reason I know that he carved it from a tree root is because my Aunt Gussie wrote these words on the box that this was found in. I'm going to read this to you. From the Civil War, carved by hand from a tree root. Dad brought it home. So this is firsthand history. It's revered in my family. I'm very glad he did not fight for what I believe to be one of the worst causes that anyone ever fought for, and that is the right to self-government in order to enslave others. Especially hard to understand where very few number of people in the South were multimillionaire slave plantation owners. So let me give you a couple quotes about, as a prelude to learning about, really an advanced way to learn about the Civil War, which is key to understanding the Constitution, constitutional rights, the constitutional Civil War amendments, and really educated people in America should know exactly what's in episode 1 of this video. And if you want to, the whole series is on Netflix. May not be on Netflix now, but I know it's on YouTube. And the first quote I want to give you is from a man who you should know the name of, named John Brown. And he was a white abolitionist, and he took his conviction to the point of engaging in violence. And his acts helped start the Civil War. So this is from Shelby Foote's first book. These are exact quotes about John Brown. Then in mid-October 1859, the telegraph clacked a message that drove all such thoughts from men's minds, meaning that there would be peaceful settlement. John Brown, called Osawatomie Brown after a massacre he staged in Kansas, had seized the federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry, Virginia, as the first step in leading a slave insurrection. His army counted 18 men, including 5 Negroes. Quote, "One man and God," he said, "can overturn the universe," he said. Think about the context of that quote if you look at George Floyd, because what happened to him has overturned the universe in this country, hopefully in a positive way in the end. Captured by U.S. Marines under Colonel Robert E. Lee, who would later head the Army of Northern Virginia against the Union, really a few months later, Brown was tried in a Virginia court and sentenced to be hanged in early December of 1859. He had the backing of several New England abolitionists. They spent an anxious 6 weeks while the old fanatic kept a secret, closed mouth behind his long gray beard. And this is fascinating to me. Seated on his coffin while he rode in a wagon to the gallows, he looked out at the hazy Blue Ridge Mountains in Virginia. Quote, "This is a beautiful country," he said. "I never had the pleasure of really seeing it before." After the hanging, the jailer unfolded a slip of paper Brown had left behind, and it was a prophecy for America. Quote, "I, John Brown, am now quite certain that the crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away but with blood." That, of course, turned out to be true, with a significant amount of the males in this country dying in war. Let me talk to you about my favorite Illinois lawyer, and I've known many great Illinois lawyers personally. I unfortunately am not old enough to know Abe Lincoln. And this is a section of the book early on where Shelby Foote gives a great biography of Abraham Lincoln. And he says, taken in conjunction with the frontier accent and the shambling western gait, meaning his manner of walking, it made them wonder what manner of man they had entrusted with their destinies. He was already elected at this point. Hostile papers called him a gorilla and a baboon, and as caricature the words seem unpleasantly fitting. Now then, this is my favorite Lincoln quote, and I just read this last week in this book, and I've read many books about him, and I never read this quote before, but I love it. In Philadelphia, raising a flag at Independence Hall, he felt his breath quicken as he drew down on the halyard and saw the bright and rippling blue of the bunting, the American flag, take the breeze. Turning to the crowd, he touched a theme he would return to, and this is the quote. Quote, "I have often inquired of myself what great principle or idea it was that kept this Confederacy," meaning the Union at that time, "so long together. It was not the mere matter of the separation of the colonies from the motherland, England, but that something in the Declaration of Independence giving liberty, not alone to the people of this land, but hope to the world for all future time. It was that which gave promise that in due time the weight should be lifted from the shoulders of all men and that all should have an equal chance." Well, this is really coincidental because that's my political philosophy too. And when he talks about how this declaration is hope to the world, he was really talking about people that would immigrate here. And of course, there was a massive immigration beginning in the 19th century into the early 20th century in this country. Then the last thing I want to tell you tonight is I'm going to read from Lincoln's first inaugural address. And this is the final paragraph of it, and to me it's pure poetry. And this is a man who did not have a lot of formal education, one-room schoolhouse for a few years, but basically self-taught and self-read. He said, quote, "I am loath to close," meaning his address. And he says to the South, "We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained it, it must not break our bounds of affection. The mystic cords of memory, stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land, will yet swell the chorus of the Union when again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature." By the better angels of our nature. He's saying the best in us will win this war, and the best in us will overcome the rebels who wanted to keep people enslaved. Now here's the irony. The man who would decide the Dred Scott case in 1857, a major case that contributed to the cause of the Civil War, was the person who had to swear in Abe Lincoln. And this guy was from the South. He was a Democrat politically. And his name was Chief Justice Taney, and he was the person who had to swear in Abe Lincoln. And of course, the Civil War amendments reversed the Dred Scott decision that literally said, that a black man has no rights a white man is bound to respect. You see why I told you early on that not all judicial decisions, no matter who they're decided by, are entitled to respect? Thank you very much, and I've enjoyed teaching you this first couple of hours.